Okay, so this was a challenging case, rescuing a delinquent sapien valve. So let me just get that started here. Um, so this is a 25-year-old male who had a tech repair as an infant, had a transannular patch, and then ended up with a conduit as a teenager with a 25 millimeter perimount valve. And he presents with mostly pulmonary valve regurgitation. RVD volume 152, not severe, but definitely larger than what we like. We tend to use 150 as our cutoff. I also had some decreased exercise tolerance in the last few months before presenting. So here's his, we brought him to cath lab. You can see that he also has pacemaker wires, and the right ventricle is dilated here. The conduit is quite large, and then you see the perimount valve. Now, again, this is the catheter bouncing back. So the PR is not because it's the catheter is bouncing back, but by echo, we knew there was a lot of pulmonary regurgitation. So we shoot the coronaries, again, with the metal ring around the perimount valve. It's less likely would cause problems, but I always take a picture just to make sure. And now what was interesting was that when you look at the right coronary, it was from both angles, it looked like it was at least close enough to the perimount valve that we were a little concerned. So, but we took these pictures. And so, of course, we ask ourselves, is the right coronary at risk of compression? Now, the standard convention idea is that with the ring around it, it's not gonna, you can't make the ring bigger, but certainly, and so therefore there shouldn't be any risk of coronary compression. But this was close enough that we wanted to keep an eye on that. So my question to you is, so here we are doing an inflation. So the question is, what's so unusual about this inflation? You can see that the key thing here is that the balloon is not stable during inflation, right? It's bouncing forward, back and forth, it eventually jumps forward. So with that in mind, we finally was able to stabilize the balloon. You see the waist inside the valve, and we took this coronary, and we were comfortable that this was not going to be an issue. So the diameter of that waist there was ranging about 22.2 to 22.8 millimeters. And so the question is, should we proceed with the pulmonary valve implant? Well, we decided that we will, and the question is which valve? And now knowing that, now right now we only have the options of the Melody and the Sapien valve for a balloon expandable valve. So given the limitation of the diameter and the Melody, we chose to use a Sapien valve. So here's a Sapien 3 system that we're moving in position, and you can see that there's the RV is dilated, so there's a pretty large curve from the right ventricle to the outflow tract here, and you create some PVCs going up, but we're trying to get this across to the perimount, and this definitely took some difficulty, but eventually we're able to get across. Again, lots of PVCs, but we're able to get across. And so the question is that we made some fine adjustments to get it so that you're positioned around the perimount. And so there's a lot of gentle, careful forward and backward movement to center the stent. So now the question is, if this valve is ready to go, are we ready to inflate? And of course, we have to remind ourselves, I like to put a second catheter there so I can use it as for angiograms and so forth. And so we have to make sure we pull the catheter away from the valve first, otherwise we'll trap it. But so we're going, inflating this slowly. And the question is, do you guys have any concerns watching this? Now, of course, this is looking backwards after the fact. 20/20 vision is always better, right? So as you increase the balloon is slowly going, you notice that this is not the most stable position. See how it rocks back and forth. Again, the same thing as in the test balloon where it's moving up and down right there at the very end. So of course, we're trying to be as careful as I can to inflate it. And now watch what happens. As the balloon is inflated, it just jumps forward. Now suddenly you have a valve that is loose in the MPA and it's not captured the inside the valve. So the question is, what's the next step? We try to pull it back. And in fact, there are times where we're able to bring it back like that, but it didn't stay stable. And so it jumps forward again, and we try to pull it back in a few more times, and we were able to get it in, but then it jumps forward each single time. So you had just how it can get into a good position, but we could never keep it. So eventually, we're trying to pull on it, and you can see that the more I pull on it, the more off center that valve is right here. See, it's no longer inside the middle of this, but it's on the outside here. So again, the more we do this, the more the angle is different. So there's no way that this is going to cross if this is going to get stuck on the outside of the perimount valve, right? So this is multiple attempts to try to, but the thing that I wanted to point out, and this is something that I looked at later on and said, this is a lesson for me. So what's wrong with the valve position? So here's the first attempt where the balloon, where the valve came back into position. If you look at this angle here, this is the orientation of the valve. And you notice that this wire is very horizontal. It's a big loop here. And so of course, if this is perpendicular to the angle of the perimount valve, it can slide back just like that, right? It can slide back and get back into position. The problem is when you start to pull, and here's what it looks like again, you notice that you're pulling on it, and if that's the original angle. If you start to pull on it, the angle is shortened. So now suddenly your angle is much more in this direction as opposed to the more perpendicular direction. And as a result, this valve drops lower. So now it's on the outside of the perimount. And of course, with that, you can't really do much. With the balloon inflated, we're also obstructing flow. So this is one of those things where, if I had known better, I would have kept this curve to try to keep it more horizontal, more perpendicular, to this, so to try to get this back in. But at this point in time, we were not able to bring this back into position. And so what do you do next? Again, I know this is just a case presentation. Otherwise, I would see if I can get the panelists to have a discussion on what would you do. So in this case, we said, let's just go ahead and inflate it as big as we can to see whether we can lock it in position, even though it's not in a good position right now. So at this point, we locked it and we deflated. Notice how the valve is no longer, it's tilted, right? And so now this valve is not stable. It's fully expanded beyond the valve. So at this point, we have to say, what are we going to do with this? So you take some picture, you can see clearly that the valve is not stable in the MPA. And if you pull the wire, this thing will embolize. So what do you do at this point? So after a while, we decided that we're going to try to anchor the valve with another stent. So here's another stent with this, and we're basically going to try to anchor the stent in the valve, in the perimount valve, but at the same time trap the pulmonary valve, the Sapien valve, so that it doesn't shift, it stabilizes. The question is, what is the technique you would use to do this? Well, you probably don't see this carefully, but this is the additional catheter we put in there. So basically what we're doing is we're gonna paste this to try to decrease the stroke volume. And notice that with that, the stent goes up actually fairly stable. It doesn't shift like the other one. So the pacing is actually a good technique if you want to stabilize anything during inflation. So we paste it, and now you have a much more stable Sapien valve, but anchored to the stent. Of course, you still have a lot of pulmonary insufficiency at this point because you've stented the valve open. So now what? So basically what we end up doing was that first of all, we created a better angle by creating this big loop to try to get more forward motion into the stent. So we got this in here. This is now positioned in the correct position. And with that, it was much more favorable with the angles. And so again, we're going to paste the ventricle. And again, there's still some movement, but definitely not like before. And then as we go up on this, it doesn't have the same shift that you would have had before the pacing. So with that, we're able to get this up to about 22, 23 millimeters, and we're able to salvage this case. So this is the final outflow tract angiogram. So the stent is quite stable. And we, again, shot the coronaries just to be on the safe side. So the lessons that I learned is pay attention to balloon testing. If the balloon is not stable during inflation, beware that the valve that you're going to implant may also be unstable during implantation. RV pacing is a good option to maintain stability of the valve during implant. You keep wires and sheets at an angle that's aligned to the bioprosthetic valve so that it stays perpendicular and easier for retrieval and repositioning. When you draw when you pull back and you change that wire angle, it's going to change the direction of when the stent can be retrieved. So you got to pay attention to that. I didn't think about that until afterwards, and I analyzed what was going wrong. And of course, you can anchor a malposed valve with a stent, and then you'll have to implant the second stent. And of course, it was a very expensive lesson. Thank you.